For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter.
Yeah, so I need like a half a dozen Boston creams.
Half a dozen?
Yeah, well, I got to take them back to the family, and I hear Teras is coming, and up in Canada, they don't call them Boston creams, Craig. You know they call them something else, like cream-filled chocolate glazed. Wait, what is that about? They don't know it was invented.
You know what you should do?
Wait, yes.
Right behind you in line is a man who might be able to help you with that question.
Teras, why don't you call them Boston cream donuts? You know they're invented in Boston.
Teras!
What is that about?
No, it's a Canadian cream donut.
No,
because they were again. We have this problem every time.
Canadian cream.
Canadian cream donuts are covered
You're
in
a
maple.
hoot.
Man, you guys.
We actually have a maple cream donut, and that has maple inside.
No, that you can call a Toronto cream donut if you want, or maybe a Vancouver
Toronto
cream
donut. Toronto, they think they already have a complex that they think they're most important people in Canada. So
right.
we don't want to call it the Toronto.
You don't want to feed
Montreal,
that.
maybe? No.
No.
Okay.
Call it.
Yes, Montreal is right out.
No, that would be actually more acceptable than the Toronto.
There's so much internal politics up there.
I don't understand this politics of Canada.
And yet at the same time, they're all very polite when they argue.
Unless you're on an escalator. Have you experienced this, Craig, with the escalator?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
All right, I think I've discussed this with Teras.
Yeah,
because it's a Vancouver. It's specifically. Well, actually, no. The Vancouver thing is you can't cross the street against the light, even if it's 2 a.m. and there's no cars.
Really?
In Vancouver, they will not cross the street against the pedestrian light, even if there are no cars to be seen. They just don't do that.
The same thing happens in Japan, by the way.
Yes, but what's interesting about Vancouver, so that backs up the polite thing. But what's interesting is if you get on an escalator in Canada and you decide that since this is an automated form of transport, that you would like to stand there and ride the escalator to the top, you are now preventing the Canadians, whose job it is to walk up the escalator whilst it moves, from getting to their destination, and they will actively shove and be rude to you verbally if you don't get the heck out of the way.
Really?
It is the only time I've ever seen a rude Canadian.
You have to stay to the right.
You do. And
because
it's
the
not
thing
like,
is...
Yeah, go ahead.
The thing is if there's usually a Tim Hortons at the top, and you have calories in order to get to the top.
But here's the thing. Like, why can't they be like polite Canadians? Like, excuse me, I'd like to go by. They don't do that. They like check you. It's like they're practicing their hockey skills. Teras, I don't really understand this, but it's, just saying, if you're on an escalator in Canada, beware. Don't stand to the left. Don't block traffic. Get the hell out of the way. That's all I'm saying.
Or else
all right.
to be checked.
So anyway, speaking of historical trends,
that
was really weak, I know.
Yeah.
We thought, since we're going to be, in our upcoming episode, we are going to be reviewing.
We are.
Now, Craig and I have gotten all excited about the new hotness that Craig got hooked into a Gen Con.
It's my fault, I admit it.
Conflict 47. Teras, have you heard of this game?
I have.
Conflict 47. It's the brand new hotness from Warlord. The same folks that makes Bolt Action and Beyond the Gates of Antares. And so what they've done here is they've taken an historical game, World War II, and they've bolted onto it all kinds of crazy sci-fi contraptions, which kind of makes it what the vernacular is weird war, right? Alternate history with sort of strange science. So you have tanks with Tesla weapons, you have walkers, you have Germans experimenting with gorillas, not gorillas, but werewolves and vampires and all these other crazy things.
Yep.
So we're not here to talk about that right now, but go ahead.
Well, it's funny you should mention the gorillas, right?
Right.
Because where did this start for us?
Well, dust, right.
Dust warfare.
Yes.
We got to make that specific.
Well, but here's the thing that was interesting. And so Craig and I started talking about this, and then we thought this might be a fun lost chapter, which is Craig and I have been on record before saying we're not huge fans of historical games.
No.
But we are, for some reason, attracted to these weird war variants.
And there's got to be some sort of psychological reason.
Yes. So we thought we'd try to psychoanalyze ourselves. And we also want to ask you, Teras, where do you stand on historical games? I know you're a miniature gamer. Are you a historical miniature gamer? If not, why not?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm not. I'm slightly interested in it in historicals. I don't, but not enough to actually take it to the brush. I mean, if I was going to do historicals, I'd want to do something different. Like I'd want to do very large scale historicals. So you could do like Antietam and build the cornfield or whatever, and a very large 52 or something like that scale. But really, it all bogs down is that for me, it's just like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings falls into the same bit for me. It's
this is why this is a whole lost chapter, because of this one phrase that when we asked you on an email and we were trying to knock ideas back and forth, you said there was one specific feeling that you had about historicals and Lord of the Rings in particular. And what's that feeling that those genres give you?
That the story's already told. You know,
right.
that there's no, like, what I'm a gamer. I love my miniatures. I love, certain specific rule sets and the whole bit. My whole thing is to tell a story on the tabletop and to have a movie happen on the tabletop. When I don't know that the dice are rolling and we're just playing and I see the one person shooting and explosions happening all in my head and I forget the dice, that's the Zen moment. And that for me can't happen when I'm not telling my own story, which is strange because there's tons of movies that I love about, historical movies about World War II or Vietnam or whatever, or tons of great ones about Little Bighorn, for instance. But I just can't get past the story's already told, and I want to create a story on my tabletop, and that's why I fashioned both Lord of the Rings and now
that's really interesting, Teras. I have to pry into this. This is interesting. So
it is very interesting.
I think so. You're saying basically you don't want to reenact a battle, basically, right? So historicals, most historical gamers in particular, love to reenact specific events and then see if they can change history or whatever, which is cool. And you're saying Lord of the Rings is sort of the same, right? If you got the GW, Battle of the Five Armies stuff and replayed it, you're kind of like reenacting a historical battle. Now, let me ask you this, though. Do you enjoy Star Wars games? Like X-Wing?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of like Lord of the Rings. The story's been told, Teras.
That's true. But I would want it to be like, I'm intrigued by doing the Star Wars, the Fantasy Flight RPG, but it would have to be a story that doesn't involve those main characters.
Okay.
So I would think that I wouldn't want it Luke or Leia or Darth to be there.
So do you always take generic characters in X-Wing? You never take Luke and Han and Chewie?
Yeah, I would never take Luke and Han. I would never do that.
All right. That's cool. You're internally consistent. I appreciate that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, cool. So, well, let me ask. So that's interesting.
Although seeing Luke blow up every once in a while is okay.
Nice. No hate, Teras. No hate.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah,
right. So, Craig, now I know you're on record, but just to remind the listeners who maybe don't remember us talking about historical before,
right?
Why are you not a big fan of it? Is it the same as Teras, the narrative, or what else?
Well, when he mentioned the narrative, it really did speak to something inside of me, because I too am all about the story and the movie and seeing it develop. But there's plenty of World War II movies that, so within a battle, I think it's not quite, it doesn't impact me to quite the same degree that it impacts Teras. But for me, it's more the human tragedy and pain of war. If you're talking about historicals, and more specifically recent historicals of World War II and forward, it's too recent for me. So I know that there are people who are still alive who went through what I'm putting these models through on the table. And of course, the closer you get to the modern times, the less enjoyment I get from the game, because I'm too wrapped up in it's too close in time and space for me to the reality of the war for some reason. And it really kind of interferes with my enjoyment. The movie in my head, which of course, we're all civilized. We know that war is terrible. And at the same time, a movie the simplistic way of saying it is the movies glorify war, which they don't for the most part. But they do sort of put a nice sheen on it that make it more interesting and stirring. And what I can do with science fiction and fantasy sort of have that feeling without kind of a guilty, not really guilty feeling, but just a disquiet that I feel when a little bit. I mean, it's not like I get morbid and depressed when I'm playing Flames of War or something like that, but it really ultimately over time builds in my enjoyment, starts to impact the enjoyment that I get from that particular game when it's real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's like a bad taste, an underlying bad taste.
And it builds. Yeah. It sort of
Taste
builds
gets
over
worse.
time. I can play one game and I'll be like, yeah, that was cool. That was like a movie. And then the next game, I'm like, oh, I'm playing the Germans again. And they were real. And lots of them were bad guys who did terrible things. And bad things happen in war. And oh my God, here I am rolling these dice. And it accumulates. It's sort of like radioactivity.
Yeah, I get that. Because I have to admit that my good buddy Tom, who he plays Blitzkrieg Commander. So by the time this comes out, I'll probably be rolling dice with him playing this, and I do enjoy playing them, but I don't think that I would build them. You know what I mean? Like, because it kind of happens with me with Chaos Space Marines too. I decided that I was going to do a Chaos Space Marine army, but I was actually found out that I was kind of growling whenever I was painting them because I was thinking about their story and everything and getting upset about, whatever, the atrocities or whatever. Right. And those are worse, of course, when they're real, right? Yeah. So, but even when I was painting my Chaos Space Marines, which is total fiction, I was still starting to sneer and growl and then kind of be disgusted with what I was painting. So I think I could game it, but I don't think I can create it too. You know what I mean? There's a difference between the creation of that table and the playing of the game.
I think my problem's somewhere in the middle. So I do like what I do like about historical games is I like their dedication to tactical accuracy. So like they'll try to build games with lots of suppression and morale and things like that because those are real big tenets of war, of real war. Whereas fantasy games sometimes will use the opportunity for B fantasy and just say, we're going to remove morale rules because it makes, for whatever reason, add complexity or whatever. So I like that part of it. But similar to you guys, I like the narrative to unfold on the table as well, like Teras is saying. And the problem, so I do that by role playing. So when I'm in the game, like and I'm playing my Signar army, for example, I'm shouting, like for Leto and making up battle cries and everything that all work in the context of Signar. And that's fine when it's a fantasy thing. But if you're playing like Germans from World War II and you're yelling, what do you yell as Germans from World War II? So all of a sudden that's a problem. So even though I'm making a new story for myself,
that's a problem.
I'm not really relating to that. So, but what I find when I do, and for some reason, Teras, painting evil guys from a fantasy world doesn't bother me as much, and I think it's because then I switch into DM mode. So it's almost like, when I'm the dungeon master, I'm like, ooh, wait till they face these guys. And so I literally think about this when I'm painting the Germans from Conflict 47, or I was painting the Germans in Dust. I was thinking, ooh, how are Craig's awesome little Americans going to deal with this, kind of thing. And so for me, it's almost like being the DM and running the bad guys, right? But because they're not real bad guys, and I can, and also it's been pretty clever about these games like Dust and Conflict 47. They've, in both those universes, right, Hitler's out of the picture, and there's different people involved.
He's not out of the picture.
He's Conflict 47. Conflict, he's a little bit in there, but there's different. You can take different paths to kind of make it work.
Yes,
right? Go ahead.
I think I would. I'm going to try that. That's going to be. I'm going to try to make an experiment in my head because recently I've been doing Frostgrave, and I pulled out all my old miniatures because, of course, there's random monster encounters in Frostgrave, and I pulled out all my lead miniatures from the 80s that I'm going to use all those as my random monsters because they're already painted, right? Some of them I'm going to repaint. So when I repaint them, I'm going to try to have that mindset on because I think that's a great way of explaining it out in your head. But I put so much mojo into my painting now that I try to relate to what I'm painting. So maybe maybe it's more how I put things on the table because Frostgrave would allow me to say, oh, this is a random encounter. We're going to encounter this. My guys are actually right here.
Like I'm thinking, like, do you ever paint like monsters for D&D, right? Because you're painting the bad guys then, or things like that.
But it's more, those are what we're going to encounter more than this is who I'm playing.
I get it. Yeah, right.
You know,
that's
what
how
I
I think about it too. It's like I'm being the DM almost when I don't directly relate to those guys, right?
It's kind of like I would never, now as an older person for sure, but probably even when I was younger, I would never play in a role-playing game. I would never choose Chaotic Evil as my enlightenment.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't play it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't know how to play it.
And I wouldn't have any fun, like even pretending.
Yeah, that's right. It would make me squirm constantly because I would always be thinking, okay, what really should I do?
I have that problem in
it's less natural.
You know, all the modern video games let you choose the evil path sometimes. Have you seen this? You know, like Mass Effect and stuff where you can be the jerk. I have problems role-playing that too long. Like I find myself not being able to do it consistently very long. I start feeling like a real jerk. Same reason.
It's funny.
It's the same reason. So this is the interesting part, Craig, and Teras, I'm curious to see about you about this. So by simply adding, what they did with Conflict 47 and pretty much with Dust also and other Weird War games is lots of the core troops are pretty much the same guys, right? Like the core.
Well, it's even more so for Conflict 47.
Even more, Conflict 47, they're exactly the same guys, but even in Dust, they weren't that much different. But then you add in these other elements like walkers and Tesla cannons and gravity projectors and all these other things, but not a lot of them. I mean, probably half to 3/4 of your army is still sort of conventional stuff. Why does that fix it for us? Well, first, Teras, does it fix it for you? Like, could you imagine yourself getting into a game like Dust or Conflict 47, either as the good guys or potentially as the bad guys, as it were?
Totally. I think it completely fixes it because what you've done is altered the end. That you've altered the end completely. So yeah, I would totally be in it. As a matter of fact, I think the fact that there still is the regular Joes and the end of the World War II tanks in it actually makes it better for me because it's more relatable.
Yeah.
So which is odd because you'd think I'd want it especially completely divorced from all aspects of that. But no, it doesn't. It adds a little bit. And the fact that Hitler or Stalin or any one of those nasty people are still kind of looming does make it better. It's kind of like, I'll liken it to if I was playing a Star Wars game, I wouldn't want Darth Vader there. But if he was somewhere else on the Death Star or you see his flyer fly by, that would be cool.
Okay,
you know
cool.
what I mean?
So it's like he's influencing the battle, but it's a different story. Then you're involved in a different place,
Yeah, and now it's 1947 too, right? Hence 47, right? So time has actually elapsed quite a bit.
Quite a bit, right?
Yeah,
right. So, Craig, what do you think about it? How does it fix it?
I think that it, for me, what it does is it allows me to play. I mean, you have this huge library in your head from war movies going all the way back to when you were a kid. Of visuals and sounds and little bits of narrative that when you just play Flames of War or whatever, for me, it slowly accumulates that sort of bad feeling about sort of playing off of real misery, and it removes that misery aspect of it because this isn't World War II. There are zombies shambling at me across the village. There's a giant spider tank moving up the road. There's a freaking gravity projector blowing trees away from my little walker as he tries to kill it. And so now you're one step away from that real human misery that sort of stands between me and enjoying a straight up historical. And now I have that entire library of visuals and sound effects and little story arcs. And now it's at my disposal again because I mean, how iconic is the US GI and stepping right out of the flickering images of Band of Brothers or whatnot. But now he's fighting zombies or werewolves or vampires or werebears. And so you've got that whole visual catalog in your head, but now you have access to it without the the commensurate sort of the misery, the real life misery that went along with it, because now it's not real. It's just enough outside of the real that I can enjoy. And this is all me. I'm not saying like anybody else should feel like this in the world, but for me, that's exactly what it is. I love painting up the World War II models. I loved painting up the tank. The great thing about the starter for Conflict 47 is that the tanks come with the regular turret from World War II and the cool sci-fi turret.
Right. That's awesome.
So you paint it up, and I'm painting up an awesome Sherman, but boop, boop, and now it's a Sherman with a massive Tesla lightning cannon on it. And so awesome. So you get to really enjoy those visuals while at the same time being a step removed from the real tragedy of the war.
Yeah.
And I guess for you, this is more of a question, Craig, but does the fact now that you have all this reference material added to the whole thing for visuals allow you to create something even more cool? For instance, your Sherman that you're talking to, you can go and look online. What does an old Sherman look like? Oh, okay, cool. It looks like that. I can paint it that way. That kind of adds to which is odd because you think that that relationship, that relatability would drag us back to where we'd be uncomfortable with it again.
Yeah, but you have that cushion.
Right.
That zombie cushion.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But at the same time, it also allows for more creativity for me to be like, okay, so if this is what it looked like in 1945, give me 2 more years of development and warfare and, and advancement of the organization of the army and whatnot. And so you can make little changes to cool things, and things can be a little bit different. But being able to go online and just be like, what did a GI in 1945 look like? What was the uniform like? And it's really interesting because it's not like most of the images that pop up are not quite the same as the as the historical wargamer paint jobs that you see. So it's really interesting to see like here's a vintage uniform that's been preserved and that's what it looks like. That's awesome. But wait, that's not quite what so you see the variation and the variety that you can work with within that as well.
Right. Exactly. I think it's exactly right. I love the addition of the of these extra, these supernatural or whatever elements, because it does bring me right into I think what I love about it is I mentioned earlier that I like the very tactical and sort of realistic nature of the mechanics to make you really feel like you had that suppression. And so, in some of our early games, and we'll talk more about this when we review it, you sort of have that feeling of like my infantry are fighting Craig's infantry and I'm using conventional tactics and things are going well or they're not going well. And all of a sudden you inject like, oh, what happens if a Tesla cannon fires into this? Or what happens if I just send the zombies in,
I love the way my bazooka team works.
Right.
Because it's right out of a movie.
Right.
If they don't get up close, they're probably going to miss. How many like Hail Mary shots in the movies? The bazooka team crawls in to get close and then they miss, because it's so hard to shoot with a bazooka. Or it hits the armor just right and glances and flies off into the sky. And so I was seeing that, but at the same time, these plucky little guys because it's hard to shoot little groups of 2 guys, so they're moving in closer and closer, and they look right on the table. They look just like they walked out of a World War II movie, but then they take out a giant spider walker.
Right.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to ask you. I want to ask the elephant in the room question.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so here's the elephant in the room question.
That was the elephant.
Nice elephant.
He's pissed too. Yeah. Hey. So we talked about GIs and we talked about the Sherman. Of course, we can paint those. So could you, in this new universe, this new 47 Conflict 47 universe, can you paint the SS?
Excellent. Yep, that's an excellent question. Go ahead, finish up.
Not so much are those included in the army lists, but can you, as a person, paint the SS? Like, can you get over that? Okay, now I'm injecting the pain back into this whole thing. Like, how far do you go down that? How do you paint a swastika? Like, is that somewhere? Like that's the elephant, right? That's the one where you go, I would. Am I going to inject the real history? How far do I inject real history into my
Russ is collecting the Germans, so I'll let him answer first. I collected the Germans with the dust, so I'll answer after.
I would not do that. and in Dust it's a little easier because Hitler's dead in Dust, so some of those things are gone anyway. But I would not do that just because I think it brings it too close back to that stuff and would get me too connected to that again. And an interesting story. So when Craig and I first started playing 40K back in the 90s, we had a league.
Yeah.
One of the guys in the league, excuse me, nice young gentleman, a really smart kid, and he had a Space Marine army that he elected to paint up like World War II German tanks. Right, so it was all mounted, Razorbacks and Rhinos, and he had his Predators and all that, and he painted them all gray with the German, the German cross on them. No swastikas, just like classic World War II German paint jobs. And a lot of people had negative reactions to that, actually, which I thought was interesting because it's kind of like what we're talking about now, where it's clearly not World War II era, but here they're saying you're taking a non-game theme and bringing it in. So I kind of feel like if you were to really go strongly in that direction, like one of the problems I had too, Teras, was when I played Flames of War, I played the Flames of War African Corps, Germans. I don't know if you remember this, but the official Flames of War African Corps dice were the German African Corps logo, which was a palm tree with laurels with a swastika in the middle. And I couldn't bring myself to buy those because I know that while I'm at the table with a fellow gamer, he or she will get this and that I'm just playing a game, but I just can't imagine if I'm in a game and I'm doing that and someone walks by what the message you know what I mean? Like
totally.
There's definitely a line there somewhere and I may be overly reacting to it in a weird way, but I just couldn't do that, So I would not. I don't know, Craig, what did you think about it with Dust?
Well, first, like exactly as you said with Dust, it's super easy because Hitler's dead. The Germans killed him, and they got rid of the SS. Right, so it's actually that's completely out. They don't use the swastika anymore. I don't think actually. Now I'm looking. No, because the Africa Corps for Dust actually the symbol is a sphinx with a palm tree over it.
Right. Oh, okay.
Which I'm looking across the pub right now because somebody a listener gave me a patch back when we were still wavering and contemplating maybe sticking with Dust when the warfare went away. But so you didn't have that. So I loved doing the Germans in Dust because there was no Hitler in the equation. So there really was. You might have to explain that to a person across the table who might not know the fluff well enough. So you'd find yourself like just having this is cool because Hitler's dead, sort of like injecting that into the conversation just to get that out in the open.
Right.
Now,
I think. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
On. No, go on. No, I want you.
Well, just with Conflict 47, not only is Hitler still alive in Conflict 47, but your source material with all the bolt action stuff, very historically accurate. So you have SS units that you can buy and that you can paint up, and they've got special abilities, and they have an army list entry right there. And Conflict 47, it's the same way. There's although I think they kind of combined 3 different elite infantry units, and it's like you can count this infantry unit as any of these 3, but they're still there. And if I was to do the Germans in Conflict 47, I would not at all do that for the same reason that Russ just said.
That is so interesting, because clearly there's historical gamers that are not crazy right-wing loonies that do that. Right. But it's just that I just can't bear myself to do that. I've had several experiences with several different symbols. It's funny because one of my friends, we played 40K, and he built up his army, and he put a symbol on his Space Marines. We played for years, and I said, you know what? After a while, I said, you know what? Your flags kind of look like SS symbols. And he looked at him, and he had a total shock in his face. He was like, oh my God. The next time I went there to game, those were gone. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, and I also had an experience just like you, Rust, where one of the gamers that we played at a tournament, he had brought his Imperial Guard tank. Remember, you can build just tanks. Well, you can now too, but back in the day, there was a special tank legion or something like that you could build just tanks. He had painted up there like World War II, and he had the flags on, and when people were talking to him and getting quite upset, he was like shocked. He didn't understand why, because he was a historical gamer. So he's like, well, what's the big deal? We're playing we're just having a tournament here. Right. He had no idea why there should be an issue. And the last one, which is a more personal one, I sometimes wear Buddhist prayer beads around my wrist. And there's the reverse swastika on that. So somebody actually asked me one day, "Are you a Nazi?" I'm like, "Oh my God, really?" So I don't, I stopped wearing that particular thing because I'm like, wow, I can't believe that someone would even ask me that. But clearly they were confused in their heads, right? They were like,
right.
They'd get me, and they were so that symbol though, and that whole feeling is what upsets us enough not to dive into historicals. So I just find it very interesting that there is an elephant still, especially with 47. Not to say that they're promoting anything,
right.
but that elephant still does exist for us. So I think that's really interesting.
So before they kick us out here, let me ask one other question of you guys. So we pretty much have all said we don't like getting that close to history to actually play historicals. Mm-hmm. We like the sci-fi stuff because it's escapism and it's not like that. So what appeals though about? I mean, obviously games like 40K are way far out there and very different from this. But why do we like this? And Craig and you and I do. Why do we like the mashup here? Why do we like a little bit of sci-fi in with that history? What's appealing about that to us particularly?
Well, to me, it unlocks all those visuals and all those memories without the negativity that goes with it. So I like sci-fi and I love history. So that kind of like opens up that whole genre for me. Whereas I'm not really 100% comfortable with straight up World War II. And that's for me, that's what it is.
What about you, Teras?
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think that's really is. You get a little taste. It's the opposite of what historicals. You get a little taste of the history, and that's enough to maybe read a real history book. But it's not enough to take the taste away from your your enjoyment of the whole thing. Plus, the story's not written for me, and I think that's really the big thing for me too. Also, it's wide open again. We can influence that. Maybe not the best of times. Maybe we can influence it for good. So that was good. Also, I'd like to. There is one thing that I would kind of a shout out is that I used to read. I remember my mom giving me historical comic books back when I was young, and I'm like, oh God, are you serious? But if she gave me, but I would seriously search out weird war comic books and read those, and I would love those. So I wonder if it's kind of back in those days where one's acceptable and one just gives you a sense that it's too learny in a way.
Yeah, I like it because it gives me that. Well, two things. One, there's the, as I mentioned before, there's sort of that extremely realistic layer to the rules, or trying to make the game feel more real, but then the little added flavor of sci-fi. So there's my gamer element there going, that's cool. But then also, I think to Craig and your point, Teras, it's kind of like, how comic books get really good if there's like a superhero, like Wolverine being in World War II or Captain America being in World War II is kind of a neat,
that's awesome.
And he's fighting the Red Skull, right? So it's not Hitler anymore. It's a little different.
Right.
It's kind of like that, right? So it's like it all of a sudden makes the game, that shift happens, and now you're, instead of living out Private Ryan, you're living out Kelly's Heroes, right? Or Hogan's Heroes. It's a little more campy and fun, and it's not serious and dark anymore, right? So it's this whole of a sudden it's just left shifts, and you're playing those kind of movies out and scenes in your head, and sort of the over-top sort of crazy fun war movies, and not the very serious, dark, the horrors of war kind of war movies, where I think games like Flames of War do such a great job of reenacting those elements that you really feel like, you're there, and it gets too real, right?
I think it's very fascinating. I think that's completely perfect explanation, Russ. I think that's awesome, and I think that it's strange that I have such a difficulty making that leap, but I'm perfectly fine with Conflict 47. I think it's exciting and just a new genre in a way. I know it's been done before, of course, but just a new way of looking at something old, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so sounds like all three of us would like Conflict 47, so you know what we should do, Craig?
We should review it.
We should probably review that game, and I think we're going to do that in the very next episode. So Teras, thank you for joining us here at Dunkin' Donuts and taking your break from Tim Hortons. And, This Dunkin' Donuts is on the second floor, so be very careful on that escalator on the way out.
Oh,
Make
yeah.
Sure you,
I'm going to watch.
Make sure
carefully.
you stand to the right. So Craig, so Teras, we'll see you in about a week here. We'll talk about Conflict 47 and all kinds of other cool stuff.
Excited. We're looking forward to it.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.